forces couples to have their perceptions aligned with reality. We think that whilst they may enter a romantic relationship, 10 years down the track, that relationship may still be romantic, but a key defining aspect of that relationship is that it will be organising their lives. We think that it isn't enough for couples to just hope that that original romanticism will continue to be enough to sustain their happiness and to sustain their needs. But what we want to recognise at Opening Government in this debate is that emotional blackmail often enforces people's ultimatums in relationships. So what we're really doing in this debate is removing a quasi-emotional contract and replacing it with a legal contract, which we think is fundamentally better for these relationships. The model that we're standing by in this debate would allow couples to specify conditions as was set out, such as frequency of sex, such as the weight of their partner. We also imagine that it would include things like your partner needing to earn a certain wage, the division of the household chores that would occur, how many kids you want to have in your relationship. A couple of things I want to specify about these contracts, however. We think that these contracts would have to specify the damage that would be given upon termination of a certain term. If those damages were not specified, we think that uniformly the courts would probably give nominal damages, and so it would be in the interest of those parties to specify damages. We would not allow specific performance of these contracts, in the same way we don't allow specific performance of employment contracts. We think that is entirely aligned with contract law. Obviously, you wouldn't be allowed to contract someone to do anything illegal, and we would also allow legal aid for the litigation of these contracts. First argument, freedom to contract at a very basic level. We think that generally in society, we have a value that you can contract with someone to do something as long as there is not an objection to you making that agreement. In fact, we think that this, I imagine you do have objections, yes. We think that this contract is actually very, very similar to the types of employment contracts that people engage in every single day. To the extent that you are engaging in a contract that will benefit someone else by virtue of your personhood, and you are doing that in exchange for something that they give you. We think that we don't allow specific performance in the case of employment contracts because we acknowledge in circumstances where a business partnership is broken down, it isn't okay to force them to continue that relationship, but it is okay to allow them to have to pay damages for going back on an agreement that they previously made with that person to continue to sustain them in an economic sense and to have an ongoing relationship with them. We think that you also in an employment relationship have a limit upon what you can ask someone to do in an employment relationship, and we acknowledge that because we think that everyone should have a right to access employment like above the minimum wage, for instance. It's different in this case, however, because you don't have a right to be in a relationship with someone. So someone should be able to set conditions upon which you would enter into a relationship with them, because you don't have a right to be in a relationship with them in a way that they don't consent to. They can put conditions on it because you don't have a right to that relationship in the first place. But moreover, whilst I've just analogized this to employment contracts, we actually think freedom to contract is more important in this instance because we think it is not at all the state's right to tell you what you can and cannot agree to in the realm of your own private relationships. How do relationships currently operate, Madam Speaker, in terms of the expectations that people have in that relationship? Largely, it's informed, I'll take you in a moment, by societal pressure, by what their friends and family think. We don't think that people consent to that any more than they would consent to the terms of this contract that we would allow them to engage in. Kids.
If you don't want to have sex with your partner, but you can't afford damages, what happens?
Well, look, we think firstly that you cannot force someone to have sex with you because that would be illegal, but we also think like it would actually be rape. But we think that these people will be able to afford damages and that there are ways in which the court can delay damages if that's necessary. But the most important thing is that if someone doesn't want to have sex with their partner as frequently as their partner wants, then they should know that up front before that relationship starts. And this is moving on to my second point, where I'm going to talk to you about why it's fundamentally important to relationships to have those ultimatums up front. We think that having this discussion before you enter a relationship is important to the functioning of that relationship and the ongoing informed consent of the people in that relationship. What happens when you don't have a discussion whereby you sit down at a table and you say, look, this is what I need from you as my partner. In order to be happy in this relationship, I need for you to have sex with me 3 times a week. I need for you to be earning this amount of wage. If you don't allow that to happen, we think that you're far more likely to have the partners emotionally blackmailing them in order to have sex with them, or just generally putting other forms of pressure. The reason why this is different is because at least a woman in that circumstance can look at this contract and say, if I do not have sex with them, I am liable to pay this amount of money. They don't know how that emotional blackmail is going to operate. Perhaps that husband is going to say to them, I'm going to go and have an affair if you don't have sex with me. I'm not going to give you enough of my wage to allow you to operate the household or to have your own lifestyle if you don't have sex with me. We think that those forms of emotional, unregulated blackmail are far more pernicious in this debate than actually allowing someone to look at a contract and say, am I happy with paying that damage if I go back on this agreement? Allowing these issues to fester in relationships are far more important, because at the time they arise, once you are already in an ongoing relationship, you are more dependent on that person. You have children perhaps with that person. You have shared assets. It is far harder for you to say no to them once you are in a relationship. And that's why any analysis of an asymmetry of power, as Kieran alluded to, is not relevant to this debate, because the comparison is the consent at the time of contract before the relationship and the consent during the relationship. To the extent that a contract is going to reflect asymmetries of power, we believe those asymmetries of power will exist in that relationship itself, and they will manifest in the type of pernicious emotional coercion that I've already spoken to you about. Whereas our proposal allows people to engage with their legal rights, to know what they are entitled to at the beginning of that relationship. We think that that's fundamentally important. We think finally that it is possible for these people to predict what is going to happen in these contracts, because we don't think that this is any more unpredictable than other types of contracts that I've already spoken to you about. But also, we think that the negotiation accounts for things that are unpredictable. The reason why things that are unpredictable, like the breakdown of relationship, are unpredictable is because people don't consider them under the status quo. When we force them to consider them and force them to decide what they need from their partner, we think that that allows informed consent to that ongoing relationship, and we're happy to stand by that.